What is going on, everybody? I am not Gary Cardone. I am Samuel Arms. I am normally the co host helping Gary Cardone out on his channel. You're probably familiar with me because hopefully you've seen me kind of on the side in a lot of his videos. But Gary is currently on a flight. He's not able to attend. So I'm actually going to be doing Cardone Corner with you guys live from my home studio just to keep it going so that everyone who is ready to go at 10 a.m. and wants to see our content and what Gary and I are discussing and talking about, you can still get the same exact content that Gary and I would talk about. If you want to see Gary, he'll be back on Tuesday. We're actually, I believe it's at 12, going to be doing a really good risk management session with Chris Inks. Those of you who have been watching Gary's channel now for quite some time, normally every Wednesday or so, we do a Cardone Corner with Chris Inks where we go over Bitcoin trading specifically. But Tuesday, tomorrow, because this is 4th of July week, we had to move a few things around. What we're going to be doing is actually covering risk management and what that term actually means, which for me is a big deal because I'm kind of the younger guy of the group, especially when compared to Chris and Gary. And I'm not a trader. I'm one of the people who in Bitcoin simply buys and holds. So when it comes to like risk management, I don't really know so much. So it's actually going to be a huge benefit to me being able to be in on that session and watching. But for the Cardone Corner today, I really just wanted to go over what I thought were some important points in the news that happened either over the weekend or Friday. Big shout out to anyone who attended, by the way, mine and Gary's live stream of the presidential debate. I think we had about 15,000 views on our Twitter live stream. And we actually didn't go live on YouTube because of certain threats around what might happen to your account on YouTube if you live stream the presidential debate. So it'll be interesting to see if some of those fears actually come to fruition. So I know a few accounts on YouTube actually did live stream CNN's presidential debate, but they don't look like they've been banned yet, which I think is pretty interesting because everything that I was hearing was that you would get a 7-day ban and be demonetized. So more news on that, I guess, later. But I guess the first thing that I wanted to break into today is Bitcoin's potential rebound and facing resistance at the 65K mark, which I think is pretty interesting. Once again, I think a common theme that you guys hear on our channel, especially from somebody like me, is I don't necessarily care about the price. At least to begin with. Hanging out with Gary has taught me that maybe I should watch the price a little bit more to be looking for buying opportunities, if anything else. But until then, most of this to me is just market noise because I am not a trader, right? I am not a part of the like Chris Inks of the world who are able to really time things well and know market psychology. I'm kind of your basic hodler who just doesn't know much about markets. And by that is, I know I have terrible timing. I know my timing. I would be the typical guy who will buy at the high and sell at the low, which is probably the worst strategy you could perform. So that's why a lot of this noise I don't necessarily pay attention to. But I think it's important to see what the community is talking about and discussing when it comes to some of this stuff. So short-term holders, while it's sitting on a loss, may liquidate holdings near 65K, capping a renewed upswing in Bitcoin's price. If we go into more detail, short-term holder wallets are in the red and many may liquidate near their break-even level at 65K. I'm actually surprised to hear that a lot of their break-even levels are even at 65K. Long-term holders' wallets with an average cost of less than $20,000 are incentivized to hold or boost their coin stash. And this is just a basic, CoinDesk article. As Bitcoin looks to recover from the July loss, new challenges loom with on-chain data suggesting a potential resistance at 65K. You know what's fascinating about this, by the way, is I thought there was going to be some correlation between the Bitcoin price and what was going to happen at the presidential debate, because we are such big fans of what Trump is doing on the Bitcoin policy side. If you attend any of our Twitter spaces, there was a lot of talk about whether Trump was actually going to bring up Bitcoin on the debate stage. Obviously, that did not happen. And I think it didn't happen because Trump really didn't need to do much in order to win the debate. I think it was very obvious that Biden performed so poorly that Trump didn't need to kind of go out of his box, which I expected him to go out of his box to try to grab and expand his voter base. So I know a lot of people in our community really thought that Bitcoin was going to be a topic of discussion, but I think that was all lost on the fact that Biden performed so badly and was freezing up half the time and couldn't get all of his sentences out that it really didn't matter too much. So the Bitcoin price prediction for a lot of people surrounding the debate, I guess, didn't have as much as effect as a lot of us thought, especially as much as I thought. The leading cryptocurrency by market value traded nearly 1% higher at 63K as of writing, looking to regain some poise after ending June with a 7% loss. June's drop, which reversed May's upswing, mainly occurred due to minor selling and concerns that ETF inflows represent non-directional arbitrage bets instead of outright bullish bets, which I don't know if many of you follow the Bitcoin ETF inflows. I know that's one of the more popular discussions that happens, especially among like crypto Twitter, is watching those inflows. Like I said, just my bias, I don't pay too much attention to that. I know it's a read on market sentiment, and that's important. But for me personally, just as someone who is just holding long term, if anything, I'm trying to see, okay, well, is this going to be a good time to buy Bitcoin for cheaper? And so that's why I kind of look at it from a tertiary point of view. But the inflows, I don't really track too much. And I think as the market matures, I know we talk about it a lot now because it's still quote unquote new. I think as time goes on, a lot of people are going to stop caring about what the inflows are and what that amount is. Hey, what's up? Gerhard Schneider says the Biden performance and the timing of the debate feels like a setup so the DNC and media can throw him under the bus and get someone else in. There could be some truth to that. I'm actually going to cover that probably later. I got a few more articles that I want to walk you guys through before we get there. But you could be exactly right. You could be exactly right. So I think, to me, the biggest news that I heard over the weekend is the fact that Sony is actually going to restart its Japanese crypto exchange Whalefin purchased from Amber Group in 2023, which I thought in 2023 was a really bullish sign, but it was kind of amidst like a lot of people are like, okay, how long is this bear market going to go on? And even in 2023, the hype train has been so awesome for crypto in general that we forget that FTX was such a huge main point for not only the political class, but for also everybody in the industry kind of licking our wounds. But that's all gone. And so it's important to remember that Sony did this still when there was some FTX fallouts going on, kind of in like our collective psyche. So for them to then kind of revamp this exchange, I think tells you that we're about to moon. And when I say we're about to moon, I'm not putting any time preference on that. I'm not putting any okay, Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million. But you're seeing mainstay companies build the infrastructure and actually start to activate that infrastructure, which tells you, okay, whatever they're looking at, I don't know the data that they're looking at, but whatever the data they are looking at is going to be bullish. So even if Bitcoin, for me, let's say I buy right now and it dips down to 60,000, I'm not going to be too concerned because I know, okay, the big boys are getting in. They're going to be buying at the lower prices. So what happens is my need to pay attention to the market price actually goes down the more institutions get into the space because I personally feel safer. And so why do I need to really figure out, oh, should I be worried about the Bitcoin price drop? If Sony's getting involved, what do I have to worry about? The terms of the deal were undisclosed. That last year, Bloomberg reported that Amber was planning to sell its Japanese units. And that's all you need to know. Sony is planning to restart the crypto exchange Whalefin, which it bought from crypto lender Amber Group last year. On Monday, Whalefin put out a notice that parent company Amber Japan was rebranding to S.Blocks. The notice added that the company was bought by Quetta Web, a unit of Sony, in August of 2023. The financial terms of the deal were not disclosed. Amber Japan, formerly known as The Current, was taken over by crypto finance firm Amber Group in 2022. Sony plans to restart the crypto exchange soon with a new app, the firm said in a release on the PR Times. One thing to consider, by the way, is think about some of the products that Sony owns, like, I don't know, PlayStation, right? So if Sony starts integrating crypto into PlayStation, which is one of the largest consoles in American homes, and by the way, Sony has also moved into the PC market, this could very well be not just an institutional play, it could be a gaming play that a lot of people are going to be excited about. So think about this. Think about my generation and younger, and even your generation, depending on how old you are. Gaming and Bitcoin go back a long time. In fact, a lot of Bitcoiners like yourselves probably came in because you saw Bitcoin through poker, right? And online gaming. Well, now you have Sony saying, well, what if we integrated into our multi-billion-dollar gaming industry, right? What if you can start tipping and rewarding people in games that you play through Bitcoin? And who's Sony's biggest competitor in the gaming market? It is Microsoft. It's the Xbox 360, right? So now what will this do as far as game theory goes on competitors and gaming platforms and reaching the younger market? So if you think adoption among the youth right now is huge, that will 100% expand in Bitcoin if Sony decides, oh, there's actually a gaming play here, because all that matters is eye time, right? And so even though from an institutional perspective, you guys might be excited and say, wow, there's going to be a crypto exchange, don't forget all the products that some of these institutions offer. And you have to really think about, okay, well, Sony, where does it get its revenue from? And what can it integrate Bitcoin into those revenue streams? That is 100% going to be gaming. Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, what's up, Brady Niels? What's up, doing deals? You're on the YouTube channel because the Twitter broadcast kept freezing. That stinks. I don't know why the Twitter broadcast is freezing, but I'm glad the YouTube's working. So if you guys are on Twitter and it's freezing, just let me know. I have plenty of bandwidth. Sometimes Twitter just gives us issues anyway. I'm not entirely sure, but it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. Hey, Kenny Peter, thanks for attending the live as well. So last year, Bloomberg reported that the Hong Kong-based Amber Group was planning to sell its Japan unit due to the strict regulations in the nation. So that's all I'm going to cover on Sony. I think, to me, that is probably the biggest thing that we need to pay attention to, at least for the news that was over the weekend when it was Bitcoin and crypto related. If you guys have a different opinion and you think there's some news that I missed that I should be watching, feel free to put it in the chat or comment it. I'm happy to bring it up during the live stream. But to me, that was the biggest point, because everything else was just kind of basic noise or people rehashing things that we had already talked about, like the presidential debate, like Trump's odds at winning, which we can go over later, like Biden's per performance. We've already kind of covered a lot of that. But I just want to go back to some of the basics of what I thought were some pretty mainstay taking points. However, what I will say is probably something that has affected the entire US nation that will absolutely affect Bitcoin is the Supreme Court ruling on Chevron Deference. And that's actually what I'm going to go over next. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Chevron Deference. You probably saw some Twitter posts on it. Maybe you didn't care. You probably think, well, we're in Bitcoin. What does this have to do with me? And that's exactly what I'm going to go over today. And also, I'm going to give you some of the background on Chevron Deference. But the most important thing you need to know is that the entire administrative state and how America is regulated, including products like Bitcoin, for example, is going to completely change. And so the Supreme Court just overthrew probably around 40 to 60 years of precedent in the ways in which our government was run. That's a pretty big deal. So let me give you some background on Chevron Deference. Chevron Deference was actually a Supreme Court ruling passed in the Reagan era. And that was when Reagan's goal was to have more conservative power. And what Reagan was annoyed at was that he kept appointing Republicans to administrative agencies in the U.S., but the courts at the time, according to Reagan and the Republican Party, were very left-leaning. So their whole logic was, well, the administrative state knows more about regulatory clarity than your random judge. So when there is a law that Congress passes and there's ambiguity in that law, it should always go to the administrative state to determine what that ambiguity means and rule on what that ambiguity then turns into as far as actual law and legislation. So it took power out of the courts and put it into your administrative agencies. Like you can think like the SEC, the FTC, all of those blanket administrative regulations that came about essentially skyrocketed after Chevron Deference. So now what's happened is you've had a complete reversal where now the Supreme Court has said, actually, the previous court ruled on something that we believe was unconstitutional. And what that means is now, if there's any ambiguity in the law, the administrative state just can't say, well, hey, we're the experts. We're also the government. So our ruling is going to trump yours, the citizen. We're going to create extra laws on the administrative state's behalf. Because, by the way, that does happen. What will happen is Congress will pass a bill and say, we give the SEC authority to do X, Y, and Z. But there's a whole lot of other letters that we haven't described. And the SEC will go, well, since there's ambiguity in what our authority is, we're actually just going to make up our own authority because of Chevron deference. But that's now over. So what that means now is anytime the SEC is suing somebody and they think they have the authority, that can be appealed and people can simply state, hey, there's actually a lot of ambiguity in this, and the SEC does not have the authority anymore to simply trump the ambiguity and make their own rules and laws and regulations. We're taking this to the courts, which is not only going to bog down the administrative state with millions of lawsuits probably, because you have to think every court case the administrative state has won through Chevron deference, through ambiguity, can now be revisited. But every new case that will come up because of congressional ambiguity will simply have people suing the administrative state, which I think is a good deal. What's up, Gary? What is up, Sam? Good job on carrying on while I'm on the Challenger, headed back to the great state of Florida. Florida destroys in New York in every way but one. I don't know what that every way but one is, Gary, because I can't think of any reason why I would really want to go to New York. I also don't think their food is better in New York. I hate to take a dig at you New Yorkers, but I've been to New York 3 times this year. I've been to multiple places that were recommended to me as the best. And I was like, this isn't much better than the food I have in Florida. So, Gary, I'd love to know what that one thing is. The Supreme Court in a 6-3 vote, they are more expensive than Florida in every way. Yeah, they're terrible. They're far more expensive. One of my favorite stories, by the way, is anytime you have a rich billionaire move, and I think it was either New York or New Jersey. It was probably New Jersey. A billionaire moved out of New Jersey, and New Jersey state had to rebalance their entire budget, their entire state budget, because they got so many taxes from this billionaire. And where did he move? He moved to Florida. I love stories like that because it just shows you where the future is and where the past is. Today, the court places a tombstone on Chevron no one can miss. Justice Neil Gorsuch, one of the most conservative members, wrote, the deference set in 1984 in a case involving the oil giant gave federal agencies wide powers to interpret laws and decide the best ways to apply them. That is so incredibly dangerous. It's so incredibly dangerous to think, let's let the government interpret the government's laws the way the government wants to, essentially cutting off citizens at the knees and not allowing us to fight back in any way. So this actually created huge problems and is one of the reasons I think that the administrative state in the U.S. has grown as powerful as it has. But this is dead now, by the way. So as you're reading through this with me, just remember, okay, so this was overturned, so we don't have to deal with this anymore. The aftershocks of such a seismic decision will be felt throughout the federal government. Let's take a look at how we got here. What was the Supreme Court case about? While Chevron deference may sound like a chess strategy, it actually refers to a landmark Supreme Court ruling, Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. The court decided in 1984 that judges should defer to federal agencies in interpreting ambiguous parts of statutes. So what that did was it took power from the judicial branch and gave it to the executive. Because don't forget, all of these administrative agencies are appointed by the president, sometimes confirmed by the Senate or the House, but they're always appointed by the president. So this this ruling essentially said all these judges that we have, which are supposed to be nonpartisan positions, we're now giving over your authority to what is oftentimes a very partisan executive. Talk about terrible. The idea was that if Congress passes a law where something is unclear or there's a gap, it is up to an agency to fill in the gap. But that is not the job of federal agencies, and it never has been. If Congress passes a law that is unclear, that's why a lawsuit happens and it goes to the Supreme Court in order to interpret that unclarity. And then Congress is supposed to react and provide a clearer law, as opposed to federal agencies just going, well, Congress was unclear, so we're going to make it clear for you and just pull laws out of the thin air. Hey, Josh Bryant, thanks for the $20. I'll make sure that Gary gets that, even though it's just me. I assume you're giving that to Gary, not myself. Either way, I appreciate the $20. You are the man. What's up, Crypto in My Veins? How are you doing, boss? I always appreciate seeing some of the same people who are on this live stream with us, by the way. I'm happy you don't pronounce it Florida. Well, I say Florida, but I actually do have I forget which accent says the Florida. I think that's like a Northeastern accent, isn't it? But I say Florida. In practice, that gives arms of the federal government, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the freedom to create and implement rules without fear of protracted legal battles. Then in 2020, herring fishermen entered the chat. So by the way, let me teach you guys something strategic about the way lawsuits work in our country. And it may be mentioned in this article, but it may not be. What will happen is when there is a law on the books, like Chevron Deference, that one side, either Republican or Democrat, wants to overturn, and Roe v. Wade is also a good example of this. Certain big funders will purposefully find legal cases to carry all the way to the Supreme Court. And so in this case of Chevron Deference, there was a herring fisherman company that was suing the government all over Chevron Deference, but they didn't pay any of their lawyers' fees or court costs. It was actually covered by a variety of conservative groups pitching in to hopefully get this to the Supreme Court. So even though you think a lot of this Supreme Court rulings might be natural and grassroots, oftentimes they're not. A lot of times people will sue with special interests in mind, knowing that they have a good chance of overturning a certain ruling based on how the Supreme Court is currently set up. And so sometimes they will actually, if the Supreme Court is not set up in their favor, wait until a new Supreme Court comes into play, and then they'll start funding and pushing battles to hopefully get the rulings that they so desire. Chevron is actually one of the examples of that. And in this case, it actually worked out hugely in our favor if you don't like the administrative state. The fishing vessels did not have a choice. It was illegal to fish without federal monitors on board to check on the Atlantic fishery, an area that extends from Maine to North Carolina. This is because the Trump administration began requiring that they cover the cost of taking federal monitors on fishing trips. So what happens is fishermen are required to have a federal monitor to make sure that they're not overfishing or polluting the ocean. Trump says, well, the government's not paying for that anymore because we need to cut the budget. So then fishermen go, well, we're not paying for it because that's not our right. You don't have the authority to do that. So, boom, lawsuit. Commercial fishing companies supported by conservative and corporate groups, including the billionaire Charles Koch, sued in two separate cases. Why would you sue in two separate cases? Because now you have two separate chances for two different arguments to get this overturned at the Supreme Court. In one, a federal judge ruled the National Marine Fisheries Service could legally impose the costs under the Chevron Deference. Who wins in throwing it out? This is a big win for conservatives. For 4 decades, they have been working to overturn the precedent. By giving executive agencies more freedom to implement laws in the conservative view, it vastly expanded the power of federal bureaucracy. So think about that. 4 decades. So what that means is up until Trump, no one wanted to get rid of Chevron deference in the sense that they knew the Supreme Court would probably strike them down. But because of Trump's Supreme Court, they finally saw the opportunity where, wow, okay, we can get this overturned because we have the right balance on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been paring back agency power in recent years, saying there are major questions of policy that Congress must explicitly detail in order for agencies to take action on them. if you guys been paying attention over the past 30 years, Congress has continuously been relinquishing its power to the executive. And this is one of the ways that they did that. So instead of Congress taking responsibility and saying, hey, we made an unclear law, we need to clarify it, they've just said, hey, we've made an unclear law, but we'll let the executive agencies handle that. And those are unelected bureaucrats who then end up making the laws. So now for the voter, this is a huge win for the voter, because the voter is now going to have more of a say-so in the laws that are passed as opposed to unelected bureaucrats. Some people have said this is going to create a nightmare within our judicial system, and the fact that there's going to be a lot more lawsuits. That's not a bad thing, in my opinion. That's not a bad thing, because if there is unclarity, if things are unclear in the law, then there should be lawsuits, and it's on Congress's job to make things clear. Chevron deference is a legal principle, however, had endured, setting guidelines for lower courts to follow. On Friday, the Supreme Court delivered the final blow, right? And so that's a big deal. This is a defeat for the Biden administration, which argued that throwing out the Chevron deference would be destabilizing. Yes. Why is it destabilizing, guys? It's destabilizing because now every federal agency is going to be having trouble figuring out, do we have the authority to issue these rules and regulations? And in fact, all the previous rules and regulations that we were issuing, are they going to now be sued out of existence? Hopefully, the answer is yes. Liberal Justice Elena Kagan said that the ruling elevates the Supreme Court's power over other branches of the U.S. government. The reason that's an interesting statement is I would argue the inverse is that actually this Chevron deference elevated the president's power over the Supreme Court. And this is just returning it to a natural balance. The president, Congress, and court are supposed to have equal power under the U.S. Constitution. So by her reading, the ruling is a loss for the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, which is not true at all. Advocacy groups and progressives also saw it as a setback for clean water, public health, fair lending, worker safety, and other areas where people rely on federal help. See, you shouldn't need a federal agency to do this. Just have Congress pass a law. You see how their logic works? Because with Chevron deference and most logic in power and politics anyway, people love it when they're the ones in control and in power. And as soon as they're ones not in control and in power, then their logic completely changes and does the inverse and flips on his head. I don't think we need to go too much more into that. Hopefully by now you guys have a good understanding of why this was such a big deal. And if you're in Bitcoin, if you're in crypto, how this is going to affect you, because now every ruling that the CFTC, the SEC, think of any government agency on an administrative level that the executive has power over, is now going to be pushed back by lawsuits and by Congress, which I think is a good thing. So we're going to talk about next, and obviously, guys, because I'm not a trader, I'm not as good as markets, we're going to be a little bit heavier on the political side today. So I hope that's okay with you. And we're only going to be running for about an hour today. So you don't have to stay here with me forever. Although if you want to, you certainly can, because I enjoy having you guys here. We're going to go over some of these rumors about Joe Biden being replaced. And I want to walk you through the strategy and why that's such a big deal. A lot of people have been talking about this for quite some time. And if anything, I actually think that it's probably talked about a little bit too much. I have a little bit of a different opinion on whether Biden is actually going to be replaced or not. But we're going to get into that. We're going to get into it right now. So here's the logic, guys. Is Democrats fear replacement scenarios as much as keeping Biden? The number one thing you have to understand is that no matter what Democrats do, they are in a very tough position. And so what we like to do is people who watch and people who are voters is we like to assume a story that makes sense to us because we think people think logically. A lot of you think that people in power think logically. They don't necessarily think logically. They think, how can I maintain my current position for as long as possible and be as powerful as possible? That does not mean it's for the good of the country. And that doesn't mean that they have anyone else's interest in mind. So once you start kind of realigning your perspective, some of the things I'm about to go over start to make sense. So let's go over. They're not writing anything down. They're not making any firm commitments. But between staring into phones that started buzzing about 3 minutes into the debate and haven't stopped since, several of Joe Biden's leading possible Democratic replacements and top aides have started to think through what an unprecedented last-minute fight into the August convention might look like. So let's think about this scenario, because if Biden gets replaced, it is going to be chaos in the convention. And you will have probably the Democratic Party getting behind one main candidate. But that doesn't mean other people aren't going to try to upset that balance. There's going to be a lot of blood in the water, and people are going to be sniffing at the opportunity to say, hey, I could be the next president of the United States. Why wouldn't someone try to push in now? And that could be anyone, by the way, from a Gretchen Whitmer to a Hillary Clinton, to a Michelle Obama, to a Gavin Newsom, but you have to think about it, what's in it for them. They're already carefully monitoring their prospective opponents' moves as they go, looking both for openings and ways to call them out for getting ahead of the president. By the way, one of the reasons this is going to be good for Republicans is now all these Democrats are not going to be focused on their campaigns. They're not going to be focused on pushing Biden to win. They're going to be focused on themselves, and that's going to change the dynamic. Kevin, hold on. Can you go over the Chevron Deference explanation again? I thought my explanation was good. I hope you guys thought my explanation was good. If you didn't think it was good, well, tough. Because I'm not going to go over it again. But all that to say is Chevron Deference getting overturned is good. That's all you need to know, Kevin. More than 24 top Democratic officials, political operatives, and donors tied to Biden, and to many of the people most discussed as potential substitutes, many of whom asked for anonymity to discuss the most politically fraught situation most have ever encountered, say they're terrified by nearly every scenario. Isn't that hilarious? This is how bad of a situation they are in, guys. They're terrified of every scenario. Going forward with Biden, they're terrified. A Kamala Harris nomination, they're terrified. A nomination of someone else who would in that case have beaten the first black female vice president, they're terrified. Long nights of multiple ballots spilling ideological and personal feuds on national television. Kevin, Grant Cardone said Biden, this proves, wasn't in control. Well, think about who is in control. Who is in control? Even just revelations of embarrassing details about people who have never been vetted by a national campaign. It would be a Category 5 hurricane, said one Democratic official, nervous about Biden considering what would happen if the president stepped aside. People don't understand the sheer destruction that would be unleashed. So, guys, remember, you're thinking Biden is so incompetent, he can't speak, he has to be replaced. Democrats in the circles of power are thinking we have no good option, and no matter what we do, we're going to be sliding on thin ice. So oftentimes what that means when there's no good option is they're going to go for the easiest option. But there are some power dynamics at play. If you guys saw Biden's post-debate rally, you saw some of those power dynamics. Those power dynamics were Jill Biden completely running the show. So don't be thinking about, does Joe Biden want to step down as president or continue to run? If Joe Biden really does have dementia or some mental incapabilities, well, who's the person who's probably around him more than anybody else? And how much influence does that have on what Joe Biden's thinking? That's going to be Jill Biden, his wife. And she has come out now more powerful and more strategic than I've seen her in public before. She was already pretty publicly present, but expect to see her on the campaign trail with Biden, because she is now running the show, which means if they want Biden to drop out, they don't have to convince Biden. They got to convince his wife. I think we can absolutely swap and win, said a major Democratic donor. If Joe Biden's the nominee, we're all in. If someone else is the nominee, we're all in. So I think that's why it is very, very likely that Joe Biden will actually get the nomination and be pushed through. Gary, I think, will have a different opinion on that. That's just my opinion. A lot of people think, yo, what's up, Ken Bile? Thanks. Cheers from Australia. Well, I don't know what time it is for you guys in Australia right now, but it's probably pretty late, I assume. Appreciate you coming on the live and hanging out. I think that they're going to push Biden because I keep referring to a poll that I think a lot of people keep forgetting. Biden is polling better than Kamala Harris. Biden is polling better than Gavin Newsom. Biden is polling better than whatever her name is, Whitmer, Gretchen Whitmer. She got a terrible name. How do you even say that? I don't think there's anyone Biden is polling worse than, except maybe Michelle Obama. But Michelle Obama hasn't been polled to my knowledge. And you have to remember, things look so bad for the Democratic Party. Michelle Obama, if she loses this election, is going to be tainted for the rest of her career. So there is actually a huge incentive for Michelle Obama to not want to run herself and to want someone else to maybe test the waters and run, because we all know that the Obama family is actually incredibly powerful and they are probably running things behind the scenes to a great extent. Why would they give away their golden goose, Michelle Obama, on what could be a really chaotic scenario when they could run someone like a Gavin Newsom? And if he loses, that's fine. They're still not tainted and they can just re-strategize and regroup. So you have to treat these political campaigns like you're a business guy, because it's all about expending capital, right? And instead of money and investment, it's relationships, which money is, of course, involved in those relationships, but there is a slight difference. And I want you guys to really, really grasp that. None of the speculation matters if a president who will be 3 months older by the next scheduled debate doesn't step aside. So far, he has stuck to an apologetic but defiant posture in public, while in private saying he knows how bad his performance was, but he still thinks that his candidacy is the only way forward. And I think he's actually right. And since he won all the primaries, he controls most of the delegates, which means that they can only vote for someone else if he decides to pull out. So according to the DNC's rules, guys, this is how their delegate system works. In the RNC, your delegates are married to a person, but if that person doesn't make it, then they're always given to the winner. In the DNC, your delegates are stuck forever. So if Biden decides to not run, now he becomes the kingmaker and can give his delegates to anyone he chooses, which is why the longer time goes on, the likelihood of him being replaced goes down, unless the strategy all along has been for Biden to be able to choose who his successor is. But the biggest problem is where is Kamala Harris going to go? Because they don't want Kamala Harris to be the nominee. You have multiple Democratic political strategists and analysts saying Kamala Harris would be terrible. No one likes her. She's not relatable. And that's not me saying that. That's Democratic strategists saying that. So how do you get in such a sticky situation as this? And how do you get out of it if you're the Democratic Party? In a lot of ways, you can't. You're kind of stuck. But that means you're probably going to have to be in the race with the horse you've chosen thus far, and that is Biden. And we actually see some of that happening, where I'll give you guys a little bit of insider information here. Let's see, where is this article? So here it is. So let me show you guys this. You're not going to think this is too important, but I'm going to tell you why it's important, because it's little things like this that we, as the general public, kind of miss. Representative James Clyburn. Democrats are fully confident in Joe Biden. He had preparation overload at a debate. Who is Representative James Clyburn? James Clyburn is the only Democratic congressman in South Carolina. He's a Black Democratic congressman and is a big influence on the Black vote in America and in the primary process. James Clyburn is the reason Biden won the Democratic nomination in 2020, along with Elizabeth Warren. But because he came out and endorsed Joe Biden during the Democratic primary process in 2019 and 2020, Joe Biden was able to get a lot of the Black vote and cruise to victory on Super Tuesday. What does that mean? That means that James Clyburn has a huge interest in making sure that Biden stays in power, because he is owed favors by the Biden administration. And that is seen, by the way, in the fact that his district has received a bunch of money from the Biden administration as a payback to him supporting Biden. So when James Clyburn comes out and says Democrats are fully confident in Joe Biden, he's signaling to the entire Democratic Party that I'm not backing away from anybody else because Joe Biden is his guy. And if someone else comes in, Jim Clyburn then loses his leverage and loses his influence. So another fact that you have to pay attention to when people are thinking about if someone's going to replace Biden, who is going to be losing influence if Biden goes away? If Biden goes away, who is now on the outside ring of that inner circle of power, right? So that means everyone who's currently on that inner circle, like a James Clyburn, has every interest, regardless of whether Biden can talk or not, they have every interest in ensuring that Biden runs and stays in power. Kevin, the governor, is doing such a great job with California. You know, the interesting thing I heard recently about Gavin Newsom is that, you know, all the governors of different states, Republican and Democrat, will often gather together and talk. And all the Democratic governors actually get along very well, except none of them like Gavin Newsom, is what I was told. So Gavin Newsom, his biggest problem is Republicans don't just hate him, Democrats hate him too. No one likes Gavin Newsom. And he's just comes off as a very kind of sleazy character, a sleazy guy. I think he'd actually be very dangerous as a president because of just how good he is at manipulation. He's a very good debater. If you've heard him speak to the media, the way he can just flip on a dime and just be a talking head is actually really quite impressive. But that's incredibly dangerous, and something that, for me, as a political guy, actually terrifies me because I know, for example, someone like Trump would have a very hard time debating him. So let's look at one more article. And then we got about 20 more minutes. I don't have to keep going. I can kind of just free flow. The Chevron Deference overturn was one of the best things we could have ever happened. Chris Inks, I'm happy to hear you say that. Chris, it's my opinion that one of the reasons Bitcoiners should care about this, not just because it's going to be shrinking the size of government, but because now, how many arbitrary rules has the SEC specifically even made, right? So, Chris, I told everybody about our what we're doing tomorrow with risk management with Chris, which I'm very much looking forward to. But I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you as always, boss. Behind the curtain, Biden's salvation plan. So a massive political PR and personal campaign is underway to reject calls for President Biden to drop his reelection race. By the way, guys, I don't want you to get caught in the propaganda. One of the reasons that you are seeing so much talk in mainstream media about Biden getting replaced isn't because it's necessarily real. It's because they're putting out feelers. They want to know how the public's going to respond. They want to know where all the talking heads are. So what this does is, if you have really ambitious people who are excited about Biden being replaced, they hear these news and they pop their head up. Now they know who's not necessarily on their side. So don't just think of, oh, wow, the media is turning on Biden. They could, but what they're doing right now is they're testing the narrative and they're seeing who the players are. And so this could all go away in about a week or two and everyone could say, yeah, that was nothing. We decided not to replace Biden. And that means what they found out during this period of kind of gaslighting the public on replacing him means that they found the best alternative was to actually keep Biden in power if he stays. On the flip side, if he does go, that tells you whatever voter sentiment that they were gathering, it was time to find an alternative. So don't let the propaganda fool you guys too bad, because it affects a lot of people when you're getting into some of these narratives. Why it matters. Biden has zero interest in stepping aside, and First Lady Jill Biden, what I tell you guys, Jill Biden, and key family members and friends agree, according to people who talk to them regularly. Biden, who has ducked tough interviews and avoided no-holds-barred press conferences, is now considering both. Look for a town hall or a big one-on-one interview this month. That'll probably happen. It'll probably be a friendly interview where he seems energetic, that he does a lot better in the debate. And Americans have very short attention spans and very short memories. So what that means is a lot of people might even forget how the debate originally went. And they're just going to go, no, Biden's fine. Look at the interview that he just did with MSNBC. Biden just went on The View and he did fantastic. Voter psychology is not the greatest, unfortunately, guys. Like it's very easy to manipulate. During a family gathering at Camp David on Sunday, Biden family members went through with a long scheduled session with celebrity photographer Anna Leibovitz. The Bidens insisted the president stay in the race, were told by people close to them. They're all in and they want him to stay in. A Biden source told us, adding that the campaign is charging ahead. 10:45 Monday. That's right. Why are you telling me the time, Kevin? Or Ken, sorry. Why are you telling me the time, Ken? What's going on? Behind the scenes. But the president smoothed it over. He called former chief of staff Ron Klain, who led the team. And one of the things they talked about was that neither he nor the family blames the prep. Campaign spokesman Kevin Munoz told us the aides who prepped the president have been with him for years, often decades. Seeing him through victories and challenges, he maintains strong confidence in them. Biden's inner circle argues that one bad night of a scratchy voice and a few mangled answers. Was that all we saw, guys, by the way? Was it just, was it a scratchy voice and mangled answers? Was that really what was at play? By the way, big shout out to everybody who didn't realize that Biden's mental state was this bad until now. Pretty much everyone else in America knew that Biden's mental state was not the greatest. I don't know how people didn't realize that up until the debate. It was very obvious. A lot of people thought maybe that's propaganda, but no, it turns out it was just fact. The biggest argument will be that Biden won the Democratic primaries overwhelmingly, and that result is final. That's true. You guys don't get to decide, a source close to Biden said, referring to high-profile Democrats now second-guessing Biden as a nominee. That's not how this works. We don't have smoke-filled rooms. Well, yes, they do. Probably this conversation that they're having with this news article reporter from Axios was in a smoke-filled room, because none of these people's names, by the way, are mentioned. Who knows if this is all just one guy? They just have to cool down, the source added. We live in a democracy, at least for now. Based on the weekend conversations with top officials and advisors, here's the Biden survival strategy. Okay, guys, so let's see if this plays out in the coming weeks. Dismiss bedwetting. The fact that dismissing bedwetting is a part of your strategy probably tells you that you're in a little bit of a pickle. The official White House and campaign line is that this is much ado about nothing, that Biden works so hard it drains his young staff. This attitude is driving elected officials and donors, basically any top Democrat not on the Biden payroll, nuts. They feel it's delusional. Nonetheless, Biden allies are cranking out data and pushing out surrogates to insist he had one bad night, mostly because of a scratchy voice and over preparation. That's the narrative. Squeeze polls for juice. Biden allies are circulating polls and focus group results showing the debate did little to change the dynamics of the race. What do we call that? What do you call a poll that has an intended purpose other than gathering factual data? That is called propaganda. They're ignoring contrarian results like a CBS YouGov poll out Sunday that shows a surge in voters who think Biden is not up for the job. If you're to believe the polls, voters thought Biden lost the debate and seemed too old, but there's little evidence they're moving fast to Trump. Both seem true. What does matter is enthusiasm for a candidate. And when there is no enthusiasm, people don't show up. So this doesn't mean that people are then going to vote for Trump. It could just mean they are not going to vote for Biden. Warrant of chaos. Biden allies are making plain and private conversations the perils of an open convention and the risk of picking a Democrat even more unpopular than Biden, namely, here we go again, Vice President Kamala Harris. They know Biden just needs to make it to the Democratic convention in Chicago, which opens 8 weeks from today. After that, unity is the only choice. Limit dissent. Biden's allies helped orchestrate the supportive tweets by former Presidents Clinton and Obama. Those happened after furious back-channeling by allies. Truth is, that was the easy part. Hillary Clinton and Obama probably control Biden and are happy to not actually be bound by the ethics laws around being an elected official. So there is something to say about being someone more powerful controlling Biden than actually having to run yourself, which may be why Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton might not run. Maybe they're in such a safe position and have so much control now they don't need to. I have a theory Biden's earpiece wasn't working. Kevin, you're probably right. Every time I look at his ears, I'm like, is this the same guy? But I know it's the same guy. I don't believe in Biden clones because I don't believe you would make a Biden clone that also has dementia. Keep elected leaders close. The White House knows Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries are deeply concerned that an unpopular Biden could cost them seats on the election day. That's absolutely true. If there's no enthusiasm for Biden, it is possible, guys, that the presidency could be Republican, the House could be Republican, and the Senate could be Republican. If that happens, by the way, all these Bitcoiners who are helping fundraise for Republicans, you better have some legislation ready because you will have a 2-year window to get everything you want. And if you screw up this once in a lifetime opportunity, then the blame is on you. Their members in tough races are scared and several plan to run away from Biden. That's what people were trying to do with Trump originally, until they started embracing him. And now Trump is very normal. And you're actually seeing that social trend, by the way, continue, where Trump's going on multiple podcasts that are popular among even people within my age group. Former Senator Tom Harkin, who served with Biden in the Senate, said in an email to supporters that the debate was a disaster from which Biden cannot recover. Get the donor class to chill out. Jeffrey Katzenberg and other top Biden backers are working the phones to reassure the deep pockets while the campaign and DNC keep turning out fundraising appeals and highlighting successes. Some donors are blaming the staff, not the man on stage. John Morgan. John Morgan's from Florida, by the way, and is a heavy donor here in Florida, and has actually donated to Democrats and Republicans in Florida. His main issue in Florida has always been marijuana. Very interesting guy, lives along the I-4 corridor around where Gary and I are. Florida personal injury law magnate, who's a top Democratic donor, tweeted Sunday that Biden's debate prep team is guilty of political malpractice. Yes, debate the prep team. Format was a disaster, which is hilarious given that CNN was so kind to Biden in every way. And a plus for Trump. He overpracticed and was drained. That is such a psyop to think that this format was good for Trump, which actually it was good for Trump, but not purposefully so. So this shows you how people will plan and think they have a certain advantage, but that advantage will go away if they don't plan it correctly. Prove vitality. Words cannot capture how elated top officials were that Biden was as vigorous as he was at a rally in North Carolina the day after the debate. I guess that's when all the stimulants kicked in. They're looking for as many opportunities as possible to show that he's still on his game and not too old for the gig. They know words are useless. They need vitality in action. Ignore and engage the media. On one hand, Biden allies want everyone to ignore the prominent columnists who loved Biden and are now calling for his resignation. On the other hand, the campaign and White House are deeply engaged with reporters like us, writing about presidential fitness. What's next, guys? What is next? Biden's kitchen cabinet sees a recipe for a narrow victory that includes a grand slam speech at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and a strong showing in the next second debate, plus positive economic news in the fall, maybe a Fed rate cut. Do you guys think that'll happen? Do you think that Biden can do better in a future debate? Do you think the economy will be better by the fall? And do you think he'll have a strong showing at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago? Those are three huge bets and huge variables that if he tanks on any of those, is not going to look good. But to the Democrats' point, all that matters is really September to October, and some voting is able to start in October, by the way. All that matters is September and October. So we just entered July. We have August. They have about a 2-month gap to make things happen. The bottom line, Biden's campaign believes voters will give more weight to Biden's judgment and record than to his grandpa gate or fading debate dexterity. It's one of the greatest gambles in the history of politics. Once again, Biden's team is telling Democratic voters, you just have to believe. You just have to believe. I don't believe that. I don't think they just have to believe. I think they have to put a ton of work in. And frankly, I don't know how they're going to be able to assemble this thing together completely. I think they're in for a very tough time. But guys, that's all I got for you today. I'm going to end 5 minutes early. I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. Once again, we will be going live tomorrow, Tuesday, with our friend Chris Inks. We're going to be going over risk management. If you haven't already, you need to make sure that you are marking that on your calendar. We will send out an invite and program it on YouTube. Twitter only lets us do it last minute, but I know I will see most of you guys there. So I appreciate you attending the live, even though the main star, Gary, is not here. That's one of the hard parts of being so famous now. Gary is just always on a plane. And so that leaves me to be his stand-in. But I appreciate you guys staying here, even though it's just me. And I will see you tomorrow with Chris Inks and Gary at my side.